Right. Welcome everyone today to Seen and the Unseen. Caterina Turner is our teacher today, which some of you have met her before. It's really a privilege to have her back here again with her thoughtful insights. And I'm really grateful to be learning with all of you as well. So my name is Reggie. I'm the Brain Northwest um, Resource and Education Manager. And today we have Caterina with us, who has a lot of experience working with brain injured community members in different professional roles. She also has a family member that has a survivor of a brain injury, so understands kind of the supportive care providing aspect as well. So she brings a lot of compassion and rich wisdom. And I know that I'm probably going to embarrass her, but I just can't help saying these things because they are all true. So, Katerina, thank you again for being here and sharing with us today. And let's get started.
Reggie, your introductions are always so kind and gracious and warm. So thank you. And thank you all for being here today. I'm thrilled to kind of review this class because this is something that is so near and dear to my heart when speaking about brain injury education and support. And I just like to say to the survivors here, you know more about living with this than I ever could. You've been navigating it, you've been adapting, explaining yourself to people who don't get it. And I'm certainly not here in a capacity to explain your life or your experience to you. I'm just here to share vocabulary and frameworks and language you can use either with doctors or with family, who have a hard time understanding, or even just with yourself on the hard days. So I just kind of wanted to review what this class isn't and what this class is, just for expectation purposes. I know we all kind of show up with our expectations of, maybe what's going to be reviewed or things you've already heard. But I just want to, again, kind of reiterate that I'm not here to dwell on how hard things are for you. You know how hard it is, and your experience is unique. And certainly not here for medical advice. I am by no means a doctor, and I'm not going to try to explain your experience back to you. What we are doing is naming what usually goes unnamed. So today is just again about giving you that language that works to use with providers, families, employers, yourself, and shifting more so from a trying to prove that it's real to get your needs met to advocating for what you need. And those are two very different things. And the second won't drain you dry. So people call this an invisible disability. And that's accurate, but for me, I feel like it kind of glosses over the real problem. And the issue isn't that people can't see it, it's that every system that you deal with, whether it's healthcare or work, or maybe even sometimes, extended family members who aren't there to see it every day, it's more so designed to recognize problems that look a certain way. So think about something that's tangible, things on a scan, a metabolic panel, something that outright says like, okay, oh, of course, this is what it is. This is what the issue is. And, we can really work towards that. Um, but the reframe is it's not that they can't see it. It's just that they don't understand or they're looking for the wrong thing. And then that changes the conversation from instead of, okay, prove you're struggling, it becomes, tell me what I should be looking for. Tell me, how best I can support you in this capacity. So it's a different starting point for a different outcome. And there's a difference between, what you can do in a moment and what you can sustain. Output is what you can produce right now with effort under good conditions. The stars are completely aligned. You're feeling good. You're having a great day. And the capacity is what you can do day after day without wrecking yourself, something that's sustainable. So I want you to picture, you're going to your doctor's appointment. You're sharp, you're tracking everything, you've brought your questions, you're feeling really sharp, and 20 minutes your game face is completely on. And, you're going in there and you're talking about these struggles of perhaps maybe memory issues, or maybe I'm feeling a little bit more foggy, or I'm feeling this, this intense tiredness. And maybe your provider's like, well, in this regard, you seem like you're getting better, you're improving. And what the doctor doesn't see is you cleared your whole day for this. I mean, you made sure you went to bed early, you had a healthy meal, you kind of pushed everything off to the side just to make this appointment work. And then you'll spend all day tomorrow recovering. And you couldn't sustain it because the cost was too much. They saw the output, but they didn't see the cost. And that's where everything kind of breaks down in healthcare or relationships or even at work. If someone catches you at your best, they think that that's your baseline, that's your normal, that's like your equilibrium. But you seemed fine at the appointment, you might hear, or Caterina, I just saw you and you were completely fine at the party. So what do you mean, you're having a rough time, or you feel, you need to see a provider for XYZ? And it's like, well, yeah, well, that's why, I'm not okay now, is because I put on my best, and I brought everything that I had, and the cost was just too great. So language that you can use for those kind of situations is, what you saw was my best effort in that moment, and that's not my daily capacity. And for partners, a good day doesn't cancel out the hard ones. It just shows you what it costs for them to show up like that. So that's really helpful to keep in mind. And then before the injury, a lot of things happened on autopilot. And, I say before the injury, but before the injury, it might have been 20 years ago or 25 years ago, or it might be something new. Regardless of when things happened, previously things were on autopilot, following conversations, filtering noise, word finding, task switching. Your brain handled it kind of in the background without you ever thinking about it. And now, of course, those things take conscious effort. So it was automatic, became manual. And I like to think about it like driving. I I need an example for everything. So I like to think about it like an automatic transmission. You don't have to think about the gears. Your brain handles it while you focus on the road. You're eating a pretzel, listening to music, and carrying on a conversation. And then imagine that the car switches to manual while you're in traffic. I don't know if any of you have driven a stick before. I have a long, long time ago, and there are a lot of stalling out. But you still know how to drive. You're just thinking about switching the gears every few seconds, and it takes attention and it takes your energy, and it's exhausting in this way that it never was before. And that's what daily life is like. Same tasks, completely different, but it's a different cost. But the issue is that no one sees the gears. So, what are three things that used to be automatic for you that maybe take real effort? And you can let those three things sit with you, or you can feel free to share them in the chat or just make like a mental note of them. Those are your high cost activities. And it's really important that you know what they are and you plan around them and you take the extra time. So, cognitive fatigue. I talk a lot about cognitive fatigue in all of my classes because, working in the brain injury community, this was one of the biggest themes was, I'm just so tired all the time. Like I don't know what to do or how to find that energy. And this is one of the most common experiences and one of the least understood. It's not like a tired, like, oh, I just had a bad night. I didn't sleep well. I really need a solid coffee. It's neurological depletion. The brain works harder than it should have to, and now there's nothing left. So what it looks like is, the words were there this morning. You were able to carry on a conversation with your loved one just fine. You're feeling a little bit more chatty. You were able to make some calls to your friends because you were in the zone. And small things feel overwhelming later on. And now maybe the light and sound become more unbearable, or decisions feel like too much cognitive load. So the more invisible, you know, having a brain injury is, the more you have to explain it. And it's kind of like this catch-22 of the more you explain, the more energy you burn. And then, of course, the more energy that you burn, the more depleted that you get. So it kind of becomes this cyclical trap. So for loved ones, absolutely telling someone in this state to push through, or "Ugh, you were fine earlier, or it's always something, or maybe you're being a little bit dramatic. It's kind of like telling someone with a broken leg to walk it off, and it requires rest. So language you can use is, I'm not tired because I didn't sleep. I'm just depleted because my brain has been working harder than it should have to. Or you can come up with some version of kind of whatever gives you that advocacy language without trying to over explain. So this explains something that drives everyone crazy. At least again, in my experience, and um, symptoms kind of ebb and flow and they vary. So why symptoms seem so inconsistent? One day you can handle something, the next you can't, fine in one environment and not so great in another. And there's a pattern. It just doesn't look like the kind of pattern that people expect. So think of it like a threshold. You wake up each day with a certain amount of capacity, and different demands draw from the same pool, whether it's a cognitive load, sensory input, social, emotional, physical, emotional stress. They don't stay in separate lanes. They stack, they're additive. So you handle a tough conversation just fine in a quiet room, but if you throw in maybe the hum of a fridge or a fan, or maybe someone has the TV too loud, or there's a dog barking, anything to kind of be dysregulating, it's just one more thing. And then suddenly you hit that threshold, and the person didn't change. It was the load, the external environment that changed. And this is why someone can completely look capable in one setting and then perhaps impaired in another. So here's another framework that you can use. Before walking into something hard, just ask yourself, what's already drawing from my capacity right now? And is there anything that I can do to lower before I add more? And this is kind of that self check-in of how am I feeling in this moment? And is there anything that I can do right now to improve my situation later on? So again, you're not hitting that crash. So executive function is your brain's command center, and it's primarily for starting tasks and sequencing steps and switching between things and stopping reactions and monitoring yourself. And I like to think of it like an orchestra conductor. So the musicians are talented and the skills are there, but without that conductor, the music doesn't come together the way that it should. You have the skill set, but it's that coordinating piece that doesn't make it flow. Executive function can be impaired while intelligence stays completely intact. And I like to say this in every class because that's so very important. You know exactly what needs to be done. You could explain it to someone else, but when it comes time to actually start doing it or staying on track or perhaps finishing it, there becomes kind of like a breakdown. And this is the invisible part because, people can see your intelligence. They assume doing it should be easy. And then when it's not, they don't understand why. But wanting to do something and actually coordinating to do it are different brain functions. So one can be affected while the other is completely fine. So language you can use in this regard is, I know what I need to do. The difficulty is in coordinating the doing. And that would then prompt perhaps a loved one or your partner to say, okay, how can I step in to support you in this manner rather than saying, well, this is just how it is, or, trying to, again, re-explain or educate. This isn't the time where you educate, you just advocate for yourself and what you need in that moment. So processing speed isn't uniformly slow, it's variable. Sometimes you're right there and sometimes there's a lag, and it might look like a pause before answering, or, maybe like you didn't hear, but because you're still processing, or getting the meaning after the moment has passed, perhaps either the person was talking too slow or they were talking too fast. You begin to lose that information where it doesn't stick, or you're sitting there thinking about dwelling about the words that they had just said. And in relationships, this might get misread. A pause could be, you know, Caterina's just not listening to me right now. She's tuning me out. A slow response may be interpreted as a lack of care or even understanding. And in a healthcare setting, it can look like confusion when it's just processing time. So language that you can use is, give me a moment, I'm processing, or I hear you, I'm just going to need a moment to just process what you said, take it in, and come up with a response. And that way, there's no gap in communication. And sometimes you might even forget to have that language. But once you really get into the groove of, I need a moment. And this is something that, my husband says to me all the time. Sometimes I go a mile a minute and I have to be very intentional about slowing down while I'm speaking. Even now, I have to try to be intentional about, talking a little slower because my brain just goes so fast. Sometimes it's like I have to get out all the words all at once. And he says, Caterina, please, you just have to take a breath. You've said too much right now. I just need a moment. And it could be anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, or he comes back after 15 minutes and says, okay, like this is what I'm thinking. So that may be something that works for you. And another really important thing that I'd like to get across is for partners or loved ones, friends or family, when there is a pause, please do your best to not fill it in with more words. That can definitely increase the cognitive load. And the pause is where the work is happening. So slow down, leave space, and then check understanding at the end and not try to ask questions in the moment while they're thinking or maybe um, kind of word vomiting out loud, just trying to process. I know a lot of people do that just to try to process the information. So for emotional regulation, when emotional responses change, um, you can be more reactive, you can have bigger reactions, slower to calm down, and people often read that as a personality change. And this is something that I heard all the time was, my husband is like this different person, or, my sister used to be so calm, and then now I don't know what's going on, or, it's like she's different people on different days. One day she'll be completely, relaxed and calm and understanding, and the next just, you know, lose it in 5 seconds. But people often read it as the personality change. And, you may have heard these things either yourself or maybe felt them. And if not, then, that's great for you. But this is something that I do hear often. So I just want you to understand that regulation is absolutely a brain function. Specific circuits handle it, and those circuits can be injured. And when they are, that's where the regulation changes, regardless of personality or values or how hard you're trying. And what that looks like is the reaction can often start before you catch it. And then calming down takes longer than it used to. And then sometimes the emotion can even hit you before you even understand what triggered it. And all anyone sees is that reaction. Again, they don't see what's going on underneath. They don't see the gears, and they don't understand, again, kind of that regulation piece with the brain injury. So, language you can use without trying to educate or trying to kind of go into depth of why this is, I'm overwhelmed. I'm not upset with you. That wasn't the reaction I wanted. Say you flipped your lid and you're like, oh, goodness me, like I wish I could just turn back time and not have said what I said, or maybe not have lashed out in that way. That wasn't the reaction I wanted. I couldn't catch it in time. Maybe next time I'll take a pause, or even something like I need a minute to reset. And then for partners, the reaction isn't about you. And I know it's really hard to feel like it's not you, but it's about capacity. And what helps most is less of that input. So, not more conversation, not trying to really talk it out in that moment, because perhaps maybe they're not in the right space at that moment. So, waiting until they verbalize, hey, I'm ready, or even if they want to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it, that's up to them. And if not, certainly respect their decision. So, sensory hypersensitivity, altered processing. Holy moly. So, about 98% of TBI survivors report at least one sensory change. And it could be something as simple as, sounds like we mentioned earlier, touch, smell, or crowds. I know crowds is that's a big one and it feels really overwhelming. And most people with kind of that invisible, TBI develop that sensory sensitivity. A healthy brain can filter input constantly and decide, what matters and just let the rest fade to the back. But when that filtering breaks down, everything comes in at the same volume. So again, that refrigeration hum or the fan, the smell of something, you could hate the taste of banana, all of a sudden, and they're like, oh, this completely different person. Like, what's going on? What happened? But again, this is a part of it. So language that you can use, especially in an environment that you're in, if it's too much, if it's too overstimulating, is again making those advocacy statements, not requests. So something along the lines of, hey, I need a quieter, dimmer, less crowded space so I can stay present and engaged. Just state what you need in that moment. I see someone here says, my food sense has changed. Yeah, and that's pretty common too. I would love to hear more about that once we hop off. So the cost of appearing okay. So let's talk about what it costs to look fine when you're not. There are real reasons people do it. It protects relationships. Um, it can mitigate arguments. It avoids exhausting explanations. It can keep your job. And perhaps it stops people from treating you like you're fragile or like things have changed. And in healthcare, appearing okay can feel like a requirement. You may feel like you have to seem more competent, or like I mentioned earlier, having your game face on to be believed about your struggles. So maybe I've had people say, when I change my appearance, when I go to a medical provider, I feel like I'm respected more. Or when I come together and I feel like, again, like I have my game face on, I feel like they really hear me rather than when I come in on a bad day. I feel like I'm not heard in those moments. But there's a cost, and you're the one who pays it. So when you push through or when you're borrowing for tomorrow, the crash is still going to come. It just comes later. And the more you override your own signals, the harder it becomes to trust them. And when you need to protect your energy, you don't need to justify it. Something as simple as, I had a great time, I have to head out. Or this was really good, I have to take some rest now. Or with love one, love you, need to recharge for a bit. Again, with no education or explanation. And I hear you. There's a lot of pressure to mask or to present in a way that is I don't want to say competent is not the word, that appears more neurotypical. So I hear you on that. But again, that comes with being attuned with yourself and giving yourself that grace of what is it going to cost. So what actually helps? Caterina, this is heavy material, and I know it's heavy. And I hate when my classes are, really intense, but it's you guys are going through it. It's tough work. It's a tough life. But really trying to think about, okay, well, I know what it is. I know what my day looks like. So let's talk a little bit about what works. Structure beats encouragement and false toxic positivity. It's not really about trying harder. It's about setting things up so trying works. And that looks like one request at a time. rather than stacking instructions. So signaling transitions before they happen, because surprise costs extra. And it's really dysregulating, especially if someone makes a last minute request or asks something more of you that you didn't allot for that day for kind of like your energy budget. So putting important things in writing so memory doesn't have to do all the work and making it okay to pause or step out without anyone making it weird. What doesn't help, even when it comes from a good place for loved ones, is saying something like, "Oh, just get it done. Yeah, it's hard, push through it, you'll be fine," without helping or, trying to break it into steps or saying, "You've got this," without changing anything about the situation or saying something like, you're getting upset, you're overstimulated, and again, you feel your top starting to blow. And again, no one's seeing what's going on underneath. No one is seeing those gears. And, perhaps your loved one might say, "Oh, gosh, Caterina, just relax. But really, it's the environment that's the problem. So encouragement without accommodation is really just noise. For loved ones, I know it's really hard not to step in to try to fix it, but try not to fix it. Your job is to reduce the obstacles in the way. So if that looks like, altering the environment, if you can kind of see those signals of, I see Katerina's getting really frustrated. I can see it in her face. You know the cues, or if they've already verbalized it, try to change the environment. Really try to think about it through their lens of like, okay, like maybe what's overstimulating right now? How can I support? So here's a pretty solid framework to support. Three types of loads are drawn from the same tank. Cognitive load, so thinking, deciding, problem solving, regulation load, managing your emotions and stress, and sensory social load. So that's again filtering noise, light, and conversation. When two are running high, the third collapses. So say you're working on something complex, a high cognitive load. You're also managing frustration because you keep getting interrupted, high cognitive load. Then someone turns on the music in the background, and it doesn't have to even be loud. And suddenly, you can't think at all. So from the outside, it looks like you fell apart over nothing, like you just lost it out of nowhere. It's different. You're different now, which isn't, that's not the truth. You didn't have anything left. So the first two had already emptied the tank. And here's how to use this. Before walking into something hard, again, ask yourself, okay, which load is already running high and whether you can lower anything before you add more. So reframing. Most conflicts come down to how people who can't see what's happening interpret invisible things. Withdrawal may look like, doesn't care, or it might be sensory overload, or canceling last minute looks like unreliable, but it might be threshold management. And a sharp reaction looks like, oh gosh, she's changed. But it might be depleted regulatory response. Forgetting looks like maybe you weren't listening. But it might be that the information was just never encoded in the first place. Again, either talking too fast or talking too slow, or perhaps they're explaining it in a way that, isn't clicking. But when you share vocabulary with people in your life, you share the understanding. The fights about what happened would start to decrease because you're finally working from the same framework of those statements of what you need rather than trying to educate every time. So a template that you could use would look something along the lines of, when I insert behavior here, it's usually because, and then you could state what's actually happening. What helps me is, and then you state the need. And then that's a really solid framework, again, to have your needs met without educating. So again, the internal kind of things that are bubbling up that no one sees, they can really help address or, again, change those environments. So you can take a second and fill that in for yourself. I have it here on the screen. What's a behavior that gets misread? What's actually going on when it happens? And then what does help look like in that capacity? And then for loved ones, this works both ways. You might say, Caterina, when you withdraw, I feel disconnected. Can you help me understand what's happening for you? Like what's going on underneath? And again, you never want to do this when anyone is at a heightened state or if they're feeling dysregulated, because at that moment, again, the input, it's just going to be too much. So it's not accusatory or, again, kind of targeting their character. It's more so in a helping lens of how can you support in that manner. So I've been harping on this whole time, advocacy. There's an old approach that goes something like, let me explain this thoroughly enough that you'll finally understand and agree to help. And again, that puts you in this position of justifying your own experience, and it is exhausting. And most of the time, it doesn't even work. Are they hearing you? Are they understanding? Is it going in one ear and out the other? So the simpler approach is here's what I need. And it looks like, hey, I need this in writing. You're at your physician. I need this in writing. If I know sometimes it's really hard when you see a medical provider, you feel rushed. They're busy. They know they're busy. It would really help me. I know a lot of people don't allow recording, but it would really help me if you put this in writing so I have something tangible that I can reference later. Or I may need to step out if it gets too loud. Again, I work best with advanced notice of changes. So kind of avoiding those surprises of, hey, Caterina, I'm going to be home late. And by the way, you have to go pick up the kiddo from childcare. And also you have to go pick up the dog from the groomer. That's pretty dysregulating if you already had plans in that moment. So just kind of avoiding those scenarios. And then I need a moment before I respond. And this is going to be one of the most important things I think that you can have in your toolkit is just simple statements. They're easy to remember. They're easy to deal out. No lengthy explanation and no justifying, just very clear and direct without over explaining. So, building your strategy toolkit. Perhaps these are strategies that you can use this week. And I didn't try to recreate the wheel here. Just take whatever works for you for cognitive load. Get things out of your head and into a system that works for you. I know some people are more tangible. They like to write things out or put something on the fridge. Others like phone reminders. I use all systems. My alarm will go off and I have it written down here and I have sticky notes there. So just do what works for you. Even voice memos. Make decisions in advance when you have the capacity. So you're not figuring it out when you don't want, not so much when you don't want to, when you don't have the energy. Use templates and routines. Like I said, those templates, those need statements of, okay, this is something that's going to apply here, and I don't have to dig too much into my energy bank to try to explain my need. So use those templates for things that repeat. And then for regulation load, schedule a rest before you crash. Build buffers between demanding things and don't stack them back to back. Know what resets you and what recharges you, whether that's movement, yoga, taking a walk, a quiet chair workout, whatever works for you, deep breathing. Give yourself that permission to leave before you're empty. And then for sensory and social load, modify what you can, whether that's headphones, sunglasses, where you sit. I know there's some people who don't like to have their back against the wall. It's too much. Or if you're at a restaurant, kind of being in the middle tabletops is really stressful and not being up against a wall in a booth. So know what works for you and you know, ask for accommodations. Ask for a slower pace in conversations. And then for partners and support networks, showing up to understand something you can't see matters more than you probably realize. Living alongside someone whose struggle is variable and it's hard, and I know it's confusing, and sometimes it may feel overwhelming for you on your end. But a few things that can help are to just believe first. They don't need to explain. When you believe without demanding proof, you're lightening their cognitive load. You're lightening their input and their future output. Um, and it costs you nothing to believe or to lean in and say, how can I support? Ask instead of assuming. What do you need right now lands better than, oh gosh, go rest. Or, have you tried? They know their own state better than anyone watching them from the outside. So support their strategies and not their dependence. And that looks like, what would help you remember this to build that capacity versus, I'll remind you. Like, don't worry about it. I've got it. I'll remind you. Just to, again, give them that independence and that agency. And take care of yourself. Get your own support and ensure it's sustainable over time. You don't have to fix anything. Believe, be patient, be present, and that's it. Just support. And sometimes the most helpful thing that you can do is simply not add to the load. So I've listed some resources and further reading here. I love to read. I love to do research, and I like to know that my experience in the brain injury community can be backed up by research, which everything is. So if you would like to do some further reading, please feel free to, review the slides. I do believe that they're sent out after this class. But again, remember, you are the expert on your experience, and nothing that I said today trumps what you know from, you living this. None of the research can, tell you your own experience. So again, the point of today was to give you language, vocabulary, frameworks, and tools, so the people who need to see you have a better shot of actually seeing you. So I thank you for your time. It has been an honor, and I believe that we'll stop recording now, and then after she'll open it up for any questions or reactions. You can come off mute or feel free to drop it in the chat.
Okay, I am going to stop the recording, which I thought I did.